Welcome to episode 2 of the Metavore Podcast. Metavore is home to bon vivants and those that like to explore the unknown, dissect the conventional, and seek the sublime. Metavore is about food, drink, art, sense, and the tasty world at large. That description is a work in progress. Today's interview will be done on Skype, so forgive if there's any poor quality of audio or video. That may change in the future, but no promises. So with me today is Dan Gray. Particularly why I'm interested in talking to him today is because of his past as a luxury bed and breakfast innkeeper. But he has a ton of other experiences that are interesting on this topic. And so, Dan, could you give a little bit of an intro for yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to. You bet. And thanks for having me on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. Right now, I'm talking from Pensacola, Florida, and a place where I've retired to with my wife and our little dog Gracie about 4 years ago. But to go back to the beginning and kind of where all of this gets started, I was a Flat Plains guy born in Illinois in a little town called Bloomington with the home of State Farm Insurance. So nothing really exciting going on there except what we made exciting ourselves. So as I looked at the outside world growing up, I just had a natural tendency to wonder what was going on beyond the horizon. And as soon as I could, when I finished high school, I was working construction thinking that I needed to go to college. Didn't have any idea why. I was told that I needed to go. So I was saving money by working construction. And at the end of my senior year, and before I started college, I didn't really get cold feet, but I got kind of warm-hearted about the idea of traveling. And I brought my grandparents' car and took my cash from construction and traveled for about 3.5 months around the Southwest. And that just lit my fuse for kind of the experiential life. So I traveled around through the Southwest, visiting friends and family, and I came back to Illinois knowing that Illinois was a great place to grow up and be from, but it was not going to be the place I wanted to be at for my adult future. So after starting college in the spring by missing a semester, but catching up with the CLEP tests, which were real handy at the time, I started just kind of getting into the college groove, not having any idea what I was going to do when I grew up. But my junior year of college, a farming buddy and I saw that there was a program at Illinois State University called the National Student Exchange. And with National Student Exchange, you could go for 1 year or a semester to universities all over the country.
Oh, interesting.
And for some reason, Hawaii it just enamored both of us. Him being a farmer and me being, just a kind of a runabout town guy looking for the next adventure. Hawaii just sounded perfect for us. And so we applied for the program. And National Student Exchange, it's the coolest thing because you pay in-state tuition, in-state room and board, just like you are part of that state college system. So it makes it affordable. And the first year we applied, we didn't get accepted. We were too late. So we go back, a semester later, and we apply again, and we're both literally leaning with our backs against the door of the application office the morning they started accepting applications because we were not going to be denied this opportunity to travel. So they accepted our applications, and we were both got accepted to go to the University of Hawaii in Hilo, which is on the Big Island. So it's a much smaller college experience, like 1,500 people on campus as opposed to over on Oahu, where there are 20-some thousand at the Manoa campus. And then sadly, like weeks before we departed, my buddy, legitimate farmer, his old man has a stroke, and he literally has to stay home and run the farm. So Kevin wound up being the guy that had to put the old galoshes and the Carhartts on and go out and run the farm. And I got to go and do this Hawaiian
Wait,
experience.
1 second. I am a little bit lost. Which farm is this?
This is their family farm. Yeah, they had a family farm, and Kevin was an Illinois family farmer, so he had to literally stay home and keep the farm afloat for the year when his dad was recovering from a stroke. So I decided to go ahead and go, and so for the school year 1977 in the fall to the spring of 78, I went to the University of Hawaii in Hilo. And the reason this ties into the luxury B&B business many years later is Hawaii put a zap on my soul. And it was such a gorgeous place, warm and wonderful people. And I just felt like I had gotten to a place in Hilo, Hawaii, that my puzzle piece just fit. I stepped off the airport there and immediately just felt like I needed to be in Hawaii. This is exactly where I belonged. And so for the next year, I attended classes, got decent grades, and had the Hawaiian experience. And then that kind of got into my, really got into my bloodstream. So twice, I'm a retired naval officer and helicopter pilot. So twice in the Navy, had a whole career, just over 20 years, but twice we were stationed in Hawaii. 3 years the first time, where I met my wife during that tour, and she was a traveling nurse. We were out there for 3 years, and we got married after that tour, came back to Florida to be a flight instructor, and never really thought I would ever get a chance to go back to Hawaii as an active duty Navy guy. And then sure enough, they sent me back to Hawaii again. So we took our two younger kids, 2 years old and 4 years old, back to Hawaii, and had a second tour on the Big Island. And after that, we just did some other stuff. Hawaii was still in our blood. We loved it. Absolutely. Every time we got a chance to vacation out there, we would vacation out there. We got stationed later on up in Alaska for the last 7 years of my career, and then another 10 years. But during that time, we took the family to Hawaii 5 times. We just wanted them to have that experience.
That's the Alaskan thing to do, right?
Oh, yeah. You got to get away from
Everyone in Alaska is obsessed with Hawaii.
Exactly.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks for that background. So what led you into the bed and breakfast situation?
Well, we had some dear friends of ours from Alaska who regularly traveled to Hawaii, and they had like a timeshare kind of thing. And we were, at the time, in between Alaska and New Orleans, Louisiana, taking care of Teresa's mom. But our friends called us from Alaska, and they said, hey, our timeshare, they're going to do some remodeling, and they're going to put us in a bigger unit. We have got an extra bedroom. You guys want to come out and stay with us and hang out in Hawaii? And it turned out that everything was okay for us to go. So we caught a space available military flight and flew for free, and got out to Oahu, and then caught a commercial flight over to the Big Island. And while we were there, we were hanging out with some friends on the Big Island, on the Kailua Kona side, the dry side of the Big Island. And we were going to church one morning, and after church, there was going to be like a picnic. So we're all kind of excited. We're down at this gorgeous little place called Keauhou Bay. We finished up having a church service where the Pacific Ocean got blessed, which was kind of wild. And I see my wife talking to this blonde-haired lady over by the picnic table. And I see her kind of waving me over, saying, Dan, come over here. So I go over to the picnic table, and this blonde-haired lady puts her hand on her hips. She looks at me, and she says, so, you want to be an innkeeper, eh? And I was caught a little off guard. I looked over at my wife and kind of scrunched my forehead, and my wife just smiled and winked at me. She said, yeah, tell her you love Hawaii and you know how to cook. And I said, oh my gosh, what are we getting ourselves into? But it turned out that these two doctors from California had a luxury bed and breakfast property in Kailua Kona called the Hawaiian Oasis, which is still there and still running, and is currently being run by my best friend from college. So I always try to put somebody I know in the job, because we love to go back, and we've been back a few times. But we started interviewing with this lady, and I tried to get like a job description for an innkeeper, and she gave me this answer, which was scary at first. She says, well, an innkeeper has to be a lot of things. And I thought, run away quick. But it was too much. We were on the Big Island. There was the chance to come out and run a bed and breakfast. We just couldn't resist the opportunity to go back out. So after a few months, and they had another innkeeper in place that they knew they were going to lose for a while. And once she went away, the owners came out to the Hawaiian Oasis. I flew out there ahead. Teresa was still taking care of her mom for a little while, and I got plugged into this job at this luxury B&B, and I had my first few days of innkeeping, which was something I had never done before. but I had cooked for some people. I'd done some cooking, and I had done some kind of residence and property management related stuff. So I knew there was a little bit of that in my resume. And I loved Hawaii, and I loved meeting new people. And I figured I'll learn how to cook breakfast. We'll make this work. And so we had a recipe book with some kind of cool Hawaiian breakfast stuff in it. And I started picking my way through that. And I had
What were some of those?
3 days of training with the boss, and then she flew back to California, and the place was mine. So it was kind of a quick start, but I liked it really from the very beginning. It was really
it sounds like a cool gig. Yeah. So you mentioned that recipe book. So what were some of those Hawaiian breakfasts that you started using?
Well, the thing about it, we would always set up, and people were so amazed at this. But, you get all kinds of really amazing fruit year-round in Hawaii. Some things go in and out of season, like mangoes or certain kinds of bananas or maybe star fruit or something. Some kind of exotic fruit goes in and out of season. But every breakfast started with two primary elements, and that was a really good Kona coffee, which was just killer coffee. Phenomenal, because the Hawaiian Oasis is located about 1,000 feet below coffee country, on the dry side of the Big Island. And you go up a little bit above us into a little town called Hulualoa, and there are over 80 coffee plantations. So you can find phenomenal Kona coffee, which is a less acidic, mild, you get a nice mild buzz with no stomach upset, no acid. So you can have a couple of cups. You can linger over that coffee, and it's phenomenal. Along with coffee, we always had a fruit plate. So I would pick one or another of these massive platters, like 20 inches long, different shapes, leaves,
nice.
like bright patterns, or, great big oval white plates. And my job was to kind of do a piece of like fruit art every morning. I would just carve stuff up and lay it all over the plate to where it was just kind of nice looking. And what was so funny is people would come up for breakfast, and they would like turn around and say, I'll be right back. I'm like, well, what is it? They go, I got to get my camera. I've never seen a fruit plate like that. So,
man.
I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew what I liked in terms of the layout, and, and the fruit was just gorgeous anyway. I mean, so much of it was in season. Then we'd get them started on coffee and fruit, and then I would do what was in the recipe book. We had about 8 recipes that we could do. We could do like a Hawaiian frittata, so kind of a pastry based, and with a lot of egg, and like an egg frittata, and with some interesting elements in it that would be more along the island. So I always had like a hot entree. We had I used to make a killer stuffed French toast, which was using some kind of a Hawaiian bread, which they have several different kinds of bread, to include like Hawaiian King's Hawaiian sweetbread kind of stuff, and then regular really earthy bread and purple bread and crazy stuff. But I would mix up cream cheese and then some lilikoi or passion fruit and jalapeno jam that I would get at the farmer's market. Mix that up with cream cheese, stuff it in the toast, and then roll it in egg batter. And then I would put the whole thing through some almond flakes, like some almond flake cereal that I had crunched up, and then throw it on the griddle. And that was the thing people kept coming back for.
Wow. Did you just come up with that, or did you borrow that recipe?
A version of it was already in the book. A version was in the book, but I started to mess with it a little bit, and then I kind of made it the way I wanted to make it with the almond flakes, and that crunchy outside really got people fired up, because it was one of the things where it was kind of a sweet and savory dish. So people that wanted something sweet were happy. People that wanted something savory were happy because the cream cheese and the egg was in there. So that was terrific. And then, I would also use there's a lot of Portuguese food in Hawaii. So Portuguese sausage, mild and hot Portuguese sausage, is terrific in Hawaii. Now, I never cook with Spam. My boss told me don't cook with Spam, even though it's a hugely popular meat in Hawaii. But I didn't cook with that. But we used to cook with Portuguese sausage, and also
what's that Portuguese sausage called again? I've had that. I don't remember, but it has a name, right?
Well, there's a bunch of different names for it based upon what brand you like, and there's some family brands that are probably 3 or 4 different family brands that have been in Hawaii for, gosh, like 80 years, you know. But so I would generally use mild Portuguese sausage, and I would make stuffed like pastry with eggs and Portuguese sausage on the inside, and then bake that, you know, kind of wrap the pastry around it and bake it so that it would kind of break out at the top.
Oh wow, yeah, that sounds delicious.
You know, we also had sweetbreads. We'd have sweetbreads, you know, different kinds of sweetbreads. Maybe I would make some macadamia nut bread or banana nut bread or something like that. And we'd have 4 or 5 kinds of local jam, you know, like lilikoi, guava, you know, we'd have mango, pineapple, and like jalapeno. I mean, so people could choose from all kinds of stuff. But the thing I loved about it was the coffee was going to be there. The fruit was going to be there. I did it a little bit different every day. And then those 8 recipes, I only had one guest ever stay for 8 days in a row. And I got to the 8th day and I said, okay, I'm on my last recipe. I'm gonna serve this tomorrow, because he was just him and his wife and one other couple. And he said, well, could I get you to make that stuffed French toast again? I said, you got it, man. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll do that again. So it was fun that way. And breakfast, we kept it really casual. Hawaiian music in the background. People would sit on the back porch overlooking the pool and the jungle garden and looking out toward the west over the ocean. And they would linger. You know, some people wanted to travel around Hawaii. You know, every now and then you'd get somebody that wanted to be in Hawaii, and then they had to like go to like 19 different places every day. But mostly, once people had that cone of coffee and they got on that back porch, they like to hang out for a while and chat and just enjoy the whole vibe of being on that back porch.
Did you have people like
a belly full of good breakfast and an extra cup of cone?
Yeah. Would they smoke cigars and stuff on the back porch?
Oh yeah,
like
sure. Yeah. So every now and then we do kind of an informal happy hour. Somebody would say, "Hey, I'm going to make fish tacos on the barbecue tonight." You know, I didn't do dinner. I just did breakfast. But they'd say, "Hey, we're going to do abalone, or we're going to do fish tacos," and then people would, you know, they'd have cocktails and cigars, or they'd be hanging out, you know, halfway in the pool and halfway out. And there was a little kind of a kidney-shaped saltwater pool. There was a hot tub. There was a tiki bar where you could cook outside. You know, you had like a full kitchen outside as well. And so people would go find, you know, something that they really wanted for dinner. You know, there's tons of restaurants, really good restaurants in Kailua Kona. But some people, they just wanted to do their own thing. And so they would bring back, like, they would go like on a charter fishing trip and bring back like fresh mahi-mahi or fresh ono or fresh fish or something. Mm-hmm. They would make these killer tacos. And even if
mahi-mahi, that's the dolphin fish, right? Not
Dorado,
the porpoise, but
Dorado, dolphin called Dorado down here in the south or in the Pacific.
It's very fatty, right? Because I remember catching some in the Florida Keys, and it was like melt in your mouth, like way fattier than the rest.
Yeah, softer fish, not as soft as sole or flounder. It does have some consistency to it, but it's not like a snapper or an orange roughy, or not at all like a swordfish. I mean, totally different. So mahi-mahi is a beautiful boneless fillet, and when you're catching it fresh, and then you're doing it on the grill with, with some mango salsa or some Hawaiian spices, or, dressing it up in any way you wanted to. I mean, you could just kill it. Sometimes I didn't know what I was going to have for dinner. I'd be up in the apartment, which is on the second floor of the building next to the main house. We had 4 suites and 5 bedrooms, so we could have about 12 guests there. But I'd be up in the apartment hanging out. Maybe I'd be checking some people in or doing some work on the computer, and I would hear people down below go, "Hey, Dano." I would go out to the balcony and say, "Okay, what's going on? What are you guys up to?" And they go, "Hey, man, we're making fish tacos and having some beer. You got to come down." So
yeah,
it was
awesome.
Once every couple of weeks at least, people would say that in order to have the experience they had to have me down there for dinner, and then they would cook for me, which was
awesome.
Had a great time.
Was it a lot of work?
Yeah, it was. The thing is, it was kind of, I'm trying to think. Somebody's got this for their business. It's the hardest job you'll ever love. Now, innkeeping, I kind of liked flying helicopters for the Navy, and it was a pretty hard job, and you had to be away from home a lot. So, did I love that job? I tell you what, I really appreciated that job, and I liked it most of the time. But innkeeping, Innkeeping was a challenge because you had to be able to switch gears so fast. And I'll just give you an example. I loved the job, and cooking breakfast every day was that was what you had to do. But I was also the landscaper for the most part. I had to keep track of the land toads who wanted to get into the koi pond a certain time of the year. I had to keep
Land toads?
pull the land toads out of the koi pond, because if they got in there, they would lay eggs all over the place, and there would be toads forever. Another thing that happened was rooster control. I know we talked about this in the intro a bit, but
Yeah, tell me more about that.
yeah. Well, in the neighborhood where we were many years ago, there was a guy that used to raise fighting cocks. So he was in the fighting cock business. That's what he did, fighting roosters. And they were beautiful. But there came a time when the neighborhood was being developed enough that they needed to kind of like get civilized and kind of bring it into the modern world. And he wouldn't stop raising these roosters. So the police were going to go raid his place. And he got tipped off by a friend that the cops were coming. So he let like 30 roosters go in the neighborhood. And so the neighborhood always has these roosters cruising through every now and then. And we had one of them that hung out in the macadamia nut grove on the neighbor's property right next door. And they would roost in the mac. Like at nighttime, they would roost in the mac nut trees. But that son of a gun would get up about 4:30 most mornings, and he would start crowing. So I had to take care of that because we didn't want the guests to be disturbed with that. So
yeah, and it sounds like a dangerous rooster too, trained to fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never thought I was taking my life into my hands, but I would go up with this low-powered pellet gun, and I'd plink him out of the tree in the morning about 5 o'clock and get him to take him and his girls over to a couple yards over so he wouldn't make so much of a racket. So honestly, by the time he met his untimely demise right before I left the job, he must have been wearing like a 100 times to get him to leave the property before he would shut. And I hated to do it because he was so handsome, but he could make such a racket. Oh my goodness. So there's all kinds of little things. Fixing electronics. Another thing that came with the property was there were 3 other properties that these doctors also owned in Hawaii. And I had to go down and like replace a microwave, fix a ceiling fan, help with the gate code, something the door didn't unlock. So I was busy working not only on the B&B property, but also helping to take care of, at times, these other properties, because the owners were generally in California. You had to wear a lot of hats. The thing you wanted to do, though, about innkeeping, that's the secret, is you just got to make it fun. I mean, people would see me. Sometimes they'd come home from dinner at night, and I would have this extra swimming pool net and an LED flashlight in my mouth, and I'm over by the koi pond, and I'm trying to get these land toads out of the koi pond, and we would just turn the whole thing into a big adventure. We just would have a ball.
Yeah.
Every now and then, one of the guys would want to help me catch toads out of the koi pond. So
Sounds pretty wild.
Could be anything, you know. And so you had to do a lot of upkeep for the property, and so it balanced itself out between like actual physical work that you did on your own, mostly behind the scene, because maybe a lot of people don't know this, but when you run a B&B, you're busy from about 7 a.m. till about 9:30 in Hawaii. And then most everybody, they want to go somewhere. They want to go to the beach. They want to go to the orchid, the place to see the orchids. They want to go to the volcano. So you have 5 or 6 all the rest of your work done when actually the property's mostly empty or always empty. And then they come back and they come back in the afternoon and they want a dinner recommendation, or they're going to make tacos or something, and then you see them again. So you got to kind of split your day up in that way. So when the guests were there, it was me with shorts, flip-flops, and an Aloha shirt, and we would just we would talk with the guests. The guests were always first. Whatever the guests wanted, that's what I was all about. And if I had delay trimming the palms or mowing the lawn or making a run down to the farmer's market, hey, we would just delay it, because if the guests wanted to sit down and pick your brain about Hawaii, that was the job. So it worked out good.
Would you say you learned any tricks on how to handle serving a bunch of people while you were there? Like, what are some of the, if someone were looking to, like, let's say, host a bunch of people at their home or something like that, and they just got to prepare something to feed them or to entertain them or whatever, what's something that you learned while being an innkeeper that might help them out?
Yeah, this is fairly obvious, but a lot of people, I don't know that everybody does this, and that is with fresh fruit, for example, the fruit plate always had to be made that morning. You can't really make fresh fruit and then leave it sitting around for too long because, it just starts to gel. It starts to give up some of its juice. But anything I could do to prep, like if I was going to make like a big egg casserole, I could get most of that ready to go, so that all I had to do is put it in the oven. And then, I knew it would be 40 minutes before it came out. So anything I could prep the night before, I would prep and just kind of get it ready to go. And every night pretty much, I would just go through the recipe book and I would just make sure that I had all the ingredients that I needed for that next day, because I could always go out at night and get something at the store if I needed to. So I never wanted to get caught in the morning short on an important ingredient. So a little bit of prep the night before goes a long way. And it really
That makes
wasn't
sense.
I would do some breakfast prep, and I would bake cookies. And the guests would love it because they would come up and ask me what I'm doing. And I'd say, well, I'm prepping for breakfast. And they say, yeah, but we smell something. I said, well, I did make some macadamia nut snickerdoodles that are over there. So, so
Yeah.
they were always excited about that. The other
Nice.
thing was for breakfast. I can't talk so much about lunch and dinner, but for breakfast was make sure the coffee's ready, because invariably some of your guests are going to be an early riser. So the first thing I would do when I walked over every morning was make sure I had coffee ready to go. Good coffee ready to go. Creamer, sugar, the nice cups were laid out. They could get their own coffee. That first cup, they would be happy to get it themselves or have tea. The whole tea service would be ready to go so that I could keep my routine rolling and get the fruit plate cut up. And
was that drip coffee?
Go ahead.
Wait, is it drip coffee, or was it some other kind of?
No, it was drip. For a period of time they tried to do espresso, and it just wound up for breakfast just not working out. It's because there's too many ways to make
there like a barista.
Yeah. So what we would do is
what I've realized
we would do two fresh pots of coffee, and put one of them in a carafe, one in a carafe and one on the pot. So we could go through 12 cups of coffee in like 10 minutes, and then I could get another pot going, and that kept everybody happy, for the first 30 minutes easy.
Yeah. What do you think all the fuss is about the other types of coffee, like espresso, pour overs? Like, I've noticed that for me, I think drip coffee, if it's good coffee, and I just put a little bit of milk in it, it seems like really good coffee. But there's like this industry that's booming, selling people like $6 lattes and or whatever else they order. And it's kind of, I'll get a latte from time to time. It's kind of nice. It tastes different, but it's kind of bizarre that people have gotten so obsessed with, having their coffee in these different fancy ways and in my mind, like it's kind of all the same. But what's your take on that?
I think there are people out there who are going to be a purist in every category. But I find there very, very few people are a true purist where they're willing to really go the extra mile to get the very best of something. What my observation is most people want to be associated with the best of things, but they kind of want it delivered. And coffee has become one of those things where, since other people generally make it for you, except for you can learn to make your favorite kind of coffee, that a lot of people associate themselves with great coffee, and it becomes kind of personal. It's like they wear it like a merit badge. Like, well, I only do French drip, and then I only do XYZ kind of French drip. It's like, okay, enjoy
with no milk and
right?
and this specific ratio, and it's common with Europeans especially. Like I knew a Spanish guy that would just see me get a latte, and he'd like, oh, nice glass of milk you got there, or because anything that wasn't like just a shot of espresso or an Americano or something was just blasphemy to him, and I just find that funny because it almost becomes a theology.
That's a good point. It's a theology or it's an ideology. And I think you and I both, when we talked about doing this chat a few days ago, I mentioned something called "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." If you're already living in Hawaii, you already got a pretty good deal going on. Hey, have a good cup of coffee. If you're going to wait around for the perfect cup of coffee, you're going to miss out on a lot of other stuff. I mean, and if you're looking for the perfect of everything, I look at myself and say, who am I to judge what's perfect? I mean,
Yeah.
if I like it, I mean, if a 6-year-old makes me a cup of coffee in the morning and they do it their way and it turns out to be that we have a good conversation and we sit down and have a chocolate chip cookie and they make me coffee, to me that's a terrific coffee because it comes with the goodness that coffee and any food really is a way of conveying a goodness from one person to the other. So I look at coffee the same way. To me, a good cup of
Yeah.
coffee is however it is you experience it. It doesn't have to be a certain kind of coffee or made a certain way. And I think that if you want to be happy in life, develop a broader area of goodness rather than a tight area of perfection.
Right.
Because life disappoints the perfectionists, and life rewards the people who are open to embrace something a little different, a little new, and
Yeah.
life rewards that open attitude really more.
Yeah,
I
that
just
makes sense. It sort of goes back to what we were talking about with, before we started the podcast here, about the phrase bon vivant and that sort of thing, where I know we talked in the past about how we both feel that we are this type of person that seeks new experiences and craves those new experiences and wants to maybe even travel the world specifically to like find out if there's other things we haven't experienced. And it's almost this for the sake of trying new things, not necessarily like, oh, I know the perfect cup of coffee's out there, or I know that there's a perfect pie in
yeah.
Brazil or something. And yeah, like it's interesting. So yeah, I find like okay, so at first when I thought of myself, especially like I was a chef or a line cook and prep cook, and I still cook at home all the time and really take my cooking really seriously. And for a while, I sort of was chasing the perfect. I think I was learning some traditional methods as a professional cook, like different sauces like bechamel and hollandaise and those. And I almost became a legalistic about it, or very literalist. Like this is what that recipe is. That's the perfect recipe because it's the traditional one. And if you violate that, you're doing something different. You're not doing that thing. So like if someone, and there was a short period of time, which I think a lot of intermediates in their field will get to this point where they're so confident that they know all the right things. Like I've noticed it with dancing too. I'll go Latin dancing and swing dancing, and there's the intermediates that have been doing it for about a year are the most, they're really cocky and not that fun to dance with because I'm sitting there trying to move to the music and enjoy myself and enjoy the other person's company and the social, coalescing of it all. And the person's sitting there going, oh, I know the steps are this, then that, and they've almost gotten too legalistic because they're just recently becoming confident in their skill to a degree where they feel like they can impart their wisdom onto someone else. So I found the same thing with cooking, and over time I've become less of a literalist and more learning like, oh, I need to actually second guess my assumptions. So just because I
Mhm.
learned that a traditional bechamel is one way, then I find out later, oh, actually, white pepper sausage gravy from the South is also a bechamel as a base, but it's something totally different from what they would eat in France. But it's
Right.
still in that category, and there might be some French cook somewhere who's scoffing at it and going like, "Oh, that's not the literal sauce. Like that's a violation of it." But the fact is, like, it's an amazing, to put that on a biscuit, with some eggs or bacon or something, is amazing. So it's like when you limit yourself to those literalist definitions, I found it actually, well, I think you actually have, I would say it makes you have poorer taste. People talk about taste, and like
Hmm.
they have these standards of, like I've said, I don't trust a cook that won't eat fast food ever. Like they think it's bad food, because I know that there's been so many times when I've craved, even Anthony Bourdain, would talk about how he'd go into Popeyes late at night and eat their mac and cheese and like wear his sunglasses and hope that no one noticed him. And this is Anthony Bourdain. Like he was a food critic and a professional chef and all these things,
Right.
but even he had these cravings. And so I think it's clearly important to continue to explore new ways of eating or cooking or practicing your skills or interests or hobbies or even your career.
Yeah, there's a beautiful thing about having a wide range. I don't think it means in the least that you don't embrace excellence. I think you still can embrace excellence. You can really put your heart into something. You can look for the best ingredients, but it doesn't mean that you have to do it the same way that somebody did it. Or,
Yeah.
my wife and I are two different kinds of cooks. My wife is a terrific cook. She finds a recipe that she likes and she makes the recipe, and it always comes out very predictably wonderful. I mean, she does a good job. I cook in a different way. I find a recipe that I like, or I just think of something I'm hungry for. I get the basic ingredients together. I may refer to a recipe or not, and then I'll start putting it together and smelling it and tasting it and kind of moving it toward my palate so that I'm happy with it, even though it wasn't what the book said to do, or I was supposed to have some kind of green olives in it, but I chose to put calamatas, or I was supposed to put Monterey Jack cheese and I chose Havarti or something like
Yeah.
that. And for me, that's part of the fun of it. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember this is one story back at the B&B. Really handsome couple came in for their honeymoon for about 4 or 5 days. And the lady would get up really early in the morning. And we used to have this oriental settee just off to the left of where I was making breakfast. It was by this big, we call it the Aloha wall, with this painted wall with these two ladies making plumeria lays. And this settee was there. And she would be there in the morning. I'd make her a cup of coffee, or she'd have some tea, and she'd scrunch up a couple pillows, and she would just lay there and relax and just watch me do breakfast. And every now and then she would say, well, what is that you've got there? Or what are you using here? Or what do you call that? But she very sparse, just a little bit of communication. And we would have a little bit of a chat, and she would watch me just work my B&B stuff. Pretty new. This is like, I was just only there like 6 months at this time. And it wasn't until the end of their stay, they were checking out in the morning about 10 o'clock after breakfast. And she brings up a book and she says, I want you to have this book. And I said, well, that's great. What is it? And I look at the front cover of the book, and she's on the front cover. It's her cooking book from the TV show that she was the hostess for. So I was like bowled back on my heels and thinking, oh my goodness. And she said, no worries. She said, you made food so much fun, and it was so relaxing. She says, you can't believe, she says, I have a cookbook, I have a TV show, I love to cook, but oh my gosh, the pressure is on. She says, you made my honeymoon perfect. I didn't have to cook. We got to chat in the morning. You made a tasty breakfast every morning, something that I hadn't had before. So she said, I want to give you this book and just say thanks for giving me a relaxing break from my cook life, so that, she says, I got to enjoy your cook life. And she said, you just keep doing what you're doing, Dano, you're going to be fine. So I was just so enamored with that comment. It was such a sweet story. And she
That's
was,
awesome.
and that filled my bucket for months. I mean, I was running with that one for a long time. It was terrific.
Yeah, that's really cool. I bet one of your recipes ended up in one of her books, probably. I wonder if you were credited.
Well, that's okay, because they weren't my recipes to start with. I was always messing with them anyway. So
Yeah.
I was having, we had a ball. Now,
Yeah, it's
my
kind of a funny
friend,
thing. Do you have any family recipes, like secret family recipes or anything like that? No, I'm not asking you to share them. I'm just curious.
my through my mom. My mom has a few. My mom has index cards, recipes from a million years ago, and she's copied a few of her favorites. And my wife has those, and she's got some favorites from her mom, God rest her soul, that are New Orleans recipes like crawfish etouffee and
Mm-hmm.
jambalaya and red beans and rice, and I mean, you talk about some good stuff. But I don't have them. I mean, I'll go anywhere and look at a recipe, or I'll just think of an ingredient and think, that sounds pretty good. What are we going to do with that? And I'll just start
Yeah, I
putting
think
something.
I'm more interested in the methods. So I'll learn methods from different recipes I follow, usually from Serious Eats or some other website, or sometimes a YouTube video. Sometimes there'll be like mini documentaries on some obscure Norwegian chef or something. There was this one for burnt cream and king crab.
Ooh, wow.
And it was showing the chef like explain the process, and they would just take the king crab, which of course comes like parboiled or something and frozen in Alaska at least.
Yeah.
They were probably using a different type of, I don't know if they probably don't have Alaskan king crab. They probably have like Nordic king crab. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
No crab of some sort, probably a similar species or whatever. Yeah.
yeah, so I took the meaty, like I think it's like the wrist, like the claw, right outside the claw, and it's like this little, sort of fillet of crab, and just seared it because I was watching his YouTube video, with a little bit of butter to brown it a little bit, and then you just place it on a plate, and then you get a pan really hot and pour some like heavy whipping cream,
Yeah.
or double cream, as the Brits say, into the pan, and some of it'll actually get a little bit burnt or brown to the point where it's almost blackened, and it
Yeah.
caramelizes, it becomes like thickened, and then you take white vinegar and you spritz that on the crab, so it's just seared crab with some spritz vinegar on it, and then you just serve a dollop of this burnt cream with nothing else added. And I did this once for Thanksgiving with some extended family in Alaska, actually, and they were just the other cook was mad because he was openly bitter because he had made like turkey and mashed potatoes and the traditional food, and as is typical with Americans, the turkey was a little bit dry, and
Ooh,
you know,
killer.
that cardinal sin that everyone commits. And but it was edible, and it was still nice. Like everyone was eating it and happy because they're with family and everything. But then I'm like, oh, by the way, I'm doing this little like king crab thing, and he was just, I was not invited back. Like he was, for some reason, so you could tell he was just glaring at me during dinner because everyone was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" And all it
Yeah.
was three ingredients. It was king crab, white
Love it.
vinegar, and cream, and it
Perfect.
was amazing. And so those sorts of
Well,
things,
well,
like the method is king there.
yeah, I mean, the better a food is, honestly, the less it needs. And if you can keep it down to 2 or 3 ingredients so that the food you're eating as the star on your plate, so you really get the richness and goodness from that food. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the way to go, man. Yeah. I
Are
mean,
you a fan of
there's
double
some
muskie at
complicated
all?
dishes. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, you are? Okay. I know
Yeah,
Alaskans love that
they
place, but
crazy stuff. The double muskie had some phenomenally weird and wonderful Alaska/Cajun recipes, and everything I tried down there, I'd eat for the rest of my life.
okay.
It was
I think I got
But
unlucky.
looking at the menu. What did they do to you? What'd you wind up getting?
So people, I think it was my colleagues. I think I was working at Alaska Dispatch News at the time. I think it was my colleagues were just bugging me. You have to go to Double Muskie, and then there were other people I knew in Eagle River that were obsessed with it, and people kept telling me to get the pepper sauce steak, and I thought it
Yeah.
was going to be like pepper encrusted, like sort of a crust around it. What it was is it was like a peppery gravy that had so much pepper in it. The steak it was a big like pound steak or something, and it was just covered in this thick gray, like dark gray gravy, and it
Ouch.
tasted. And not only that, the fresh pepper, or I mean, the pepper was clearly not fresh because it tasted like dust, like it was bottled and pre-ground, and it was just this
Oh,
strong stale pepper flavor. And then the steak is like almost like roasted prime rib, where it had no
yeah.
searing. So it was just like you get through that and there's no crust. It's just, and I was just like, oh, like everyone was raving about this. And so then I was, the annoying customer that asked them, like, I'm like, okay, I'm thinking, okay, I'm spending like what, $100 on the steak or something, or whatever it was. So I'm thinking like, I want to give them a benefit of the doubt and try something else. And so I just asked, like, can I get the New York strip instead? Just medium rare New York strip, and I think it came with some hollandaise or something, and that was good. But the first thing that everyone was raving at me about, I was just like, man, this is terrible. So it's kind of funny that everyone I knew was recommending this one steak on the menu, and it turned out to me, I was just like, this is a terrible idea. But I didn't.
I think sometimes you go to like a legacy place, and the legacy of the place started a long time ago, and the Double Muskie's been, it's been down there in Girdwood for a long time. And I find this as a professional trainer, I've done a lot of different kinds of training. Training has generations. The first generation of training is pretty good. You get like an 85 to 90% transfer on whatever it is you're training. So whoever made that dish famous, trained somebody else to make it. But they were not quite as good at making it as they were. And you go 2 or 3 generations down the road, and you get some new guy who thinks, well, this dish, the way they taught me to make it would be really good, but I think even more pepper would be better. And it's like, no. So sometimes the beautiful legacy of some great dishes is it's almost like it just doesn't have longevity. You almost have to have that legacy dish from the chef who created it, because he's going to watch it like his baby, and it's going to come out really good. So I'm thinking that dish probably went through a few too many generations, and after 35 or 40 years, whoever was making it that night was pushing things that they just didn't know how to balance, and they ruined it, and it's too bad.
Well, and it could have been a situation of understaffing too, because when I worked as a line cook and I was doing dinner, I wanted to try breakfast, giving breakfast a shot, because I had heard it was challenging because of all the eggs you had to cook perfectly. And I was thinking, this is a challenge that I want to try, because I actually am not a big fan of eggs. At the time, I'd only recently learned how to do a perfect fried egg at the different temperatures and all that. And so I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. So the head chef, and this was at the Eagle River Ale House in Eagle River. You've probably been there, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I was told, come in, you'll be with the sous chef. It'll just be you and him in the morning. It might be kind of busy sometimes, and so it might be tough, but just come in. So it turns out I get on there. I get there 15 minutes early. It's like 7 a.m. or whatever, or 6:45 a.m. And he's not there. And I get the line ready. I knew how to prepare all the sauces, the hollandaise, and get everything on the steam table and everything. And then it gets to be 7 and he's not there. And they're opening the door to the restaurant. And there had been some sort of like meeting, like it could have been Chamber of Commerce or some sort of gathering nearby. And there was a line out the door, and they just start pouring in as soon as the restaurant opens, and the servers seat them all. They seat them all immediately. And here I am, first day doing breakfast, cooking breakfast. I'm the only one in the restaurant that can cook, and the sous chef's still not there. And so the orders start just flying in, like the fastest I've ever seen tickets fly in. It was like a perfect storm, and I'm struggling to get enough hash browns down and cook the eggs. And I think most of what I sent out was good. It was, what I was supposed to send out. But there were definitely some things which I just had to get them out, and the eggs were either overcooked or something was off, because I just couldn't handle. It was my first day doing breakfast.
Oh, it's a nightmare.
Yeah. And so after that rush ends, which is like an hour later, and some people actually left because they had ordered like 45 minutes ago and still hadn't gotten their food. So they literally had gotten up and left, which I understand. I've been there, especially if you have something to do with the rest of your day. Right. But it was just a mess. And then the sous chef comes in. He's like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, what? Yeah. Where were you? And he had just, I guess, slept in or something. It was, and the owner came in and said, I never want you to work breakfast ever again. You're never going to be on that line during breakfast ever again. And I'm just like, he was saying that to me, and I'm like, okay. I mean, it was my first go. Okay. So then they never let me do breakfast again. That was just a dinner cook, which honestly, like, dinner was really hard. So it wasn't that dinner was even, because we had 3 line cooks, and it was still crazy. So the facts that they expected me, that was just nuts. But so I can understand why maybe at Double Muskie, something like that happened where they were understaffed and he just pushed something out and it didn't end up being good at all.
You were saying too, like, people come in all at once. The Double Muskie there in Girdwood, it opens smartly at 5 p.m. and not a minute before. So you get a dump load of people all coming in wanting dinner at the same time. That's a tough one. Here's B&B. In the B&B business, it's a little bit different because you, in a sense, you're cooking in situ. I mean, you're cooking in front of people for the most part. And so if you get flustered, then the aloha comes off the experience. So what I did was sometimes I had to fall back and punt because I couldn't get the macadamia nut pancakes out fast enough, or I couldn't do this or do that. So I would start telling stories. I'd keep working, but I would connect with the guests. And see, in a restaurant, it's different. But in a B&B, if the guests see me like crazy busy, but I'm still having a good time, they're still having a good time. And that made all the difference. Plus, they would give me extra time. They would see that, like, extra people had come in for breakfast, or somebody wanted second helpings, or somebody wanted their dish made a little bit differently because they were gluten-free or they were vegan or whatever. And if I could keep my attitude positive and still just be working like crazy, everything was super cool. And it still was the Aloha experience. Keep the music on, keep moving, connect with your guests, share your smile. I mean, in Hawaii, one of the things in Hawaii that's really interesting, a lot of people came to the B&B, had never been to Hawaii before. And I've been living there for years, and it's a treasure. But they would come for like this one, maybe once in a lifetime experience in Hawaii. And before they go out for their first morning, they would say, "Hey, am I gonna have trouble with the local people here?" And I would look at him and say, "Not if you smile first." I said, "If you smile first, you're in the land of aloha." I said, "If you don't smile first, you're just another tourist coming by waiting to knock a hunk of this or take some of that or get what you want and leave. But if you come down to anywhere in town, or you come anywhere on the property, or you meet like local Hawaiian people and you smile first and you say, 'Hey, how's it, man?' You give them a little shaka, you're in. I mean, you're going to get invited
What's
to the next.
Is that
next baby.
Is that this?
That's the hang loose sign. Yeah. Shaka.
Okay.
So
a lot of Alaskans love that because they spend so much time in Hawaii. That's like the go-to thing in Alaska.
And there's a ton of Polynesians in Alaska, and vice versa. Alaskans love to go to Hawaii for good reason in the winter, but a lot of Polynesians love to come to Alaska because of the fishing, the fresh fish, man. The Polynesian people are about fresh fish. And when you can come up and you get like halibut, 5 different species of salmon. You can get 2 different kinds of trout, Arctic char. You can, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
It makes it worthwhile for people to make a trip. So we see a lot of shaka people up in Alaska. We see a lot of oil people up in Alaska with these big belt buckles, and you can tell they're from like Oklahoma, Texas, or Louisiana. But a lot of it, honestly, with food is your attitude goes into the messed up, and your head's not right and your heart's not right. That food's not right. And if you're having a good time and you're smiling and you're trying to be lighthearted and you want to show people what the Aloha spirit is all about, you can serve the simplest thing with a smile and a good cup of coffee, and people will tell you. In fact, they did this. They would write reviews and say, "Best breakfast I ever had." And I might have made like scrambled eggs with Portuguese sausage and like toast with good coffee and some fruit. But the experience. So you create an experience, and the food gets to be center star of the star of the show. But the attitude that the food is made in and the attitude that it's served with,
Right.
it makes
that makes sense.
all the difference.
That idea of sort of setting the tone yourself and being intent on, whether it's being intent on having a good time or being intent on projecting that positivity, it applies, like people, before my first time in France, Americans would tell me, oh, good luck. They really don't like tourists over there. It's going to be a rough, and tons of Americans have this opinion that when they went to France, then there were all these like French people just like, oh, I don't like you. And what I found was I met not a single French person that gave me a hard time. And I think a lot of it was because I'd be going up to them trying to speak French, like from my Translate app or something. And I'd just be like, look, would you mind helping me out? Like, let me struggle through this. And you'd think they'd be offended by my mispronunciation or something. But, maybe they made fun of me after I left the room. I don't know. But my experience was that it was just pleasant. Because I came into it expecting that if I gave them the benefit of the doubt, that they would return. And that's what happened. And I have a colleague that talked about this where, she'll have family members and things that talk about issues they have with certain types of people or in society or just everyday life, like in different interactions, and how certain people can just be really almost seem like oppressive or something, like they almost are upset that you even exist. And then, but that's her sister. But then her approach is, just, putting good energy out. And what she's found is that she gets it back. And so she doesn't have the same experience as her sister because she just puts good energy out there. And it rings true for me.
Yeah. Expectation management is huge. And also, there's an old saying, like when some of the other instructors would tell me, oh, this student's such a knucklehead, or he never pays attention, or you just can't get through to this person. And I would give him this expression. I would say, remember, you attract what you are, not what you want. So I said, you got to model this for the student. You got to model the behavior of a professional pilot. He or she are the one learning. You're supposed to be showing them how, not just the procedures. You got to show them the persona, the panache. You got to show them what flying is all about. And it applies everywhere too, just like you're saying in France. You attract what you are. So if you go out there as a person interested in another culture and the people, that's exactly what comes back to you. And that's happened to me all over the world. I've been all over the world, and everywhere I go, from South Sudan to South Korea to Tanzania to you name it, Costa Rica. If you learn how to say hello and goodbye, thank you, please, and you're welcome, and good night or God bless you. You learn how to say a dozen words in that language, you are a superstar in their mind because you tried. You cared. You cared to know what they know. You cared about their life and their language. And they don't expect Americans to do that. They just don't. So if you can make that little bit of extra effort, and it just like in France, it pays huge dividends in terms of your experience. It does. It comes right back to you.
Yeah, I found that applies for sure. Even if like you're probably always going to feel like you're in a weird space. At least I find that I feel like, let's say I was in a pub in Saint-Malo, France, and I didn't know any of these people, and I felt out of place and I felt uncomfortable. Like, I don't know these people. This is strange. And I did feel myself getting a little bit irritable, like frustrated with the situation and almost wanting to, maybe cling on to one person and then just kind of talk to them about like, what's everyone's deal or something, but I realized like when I just acted like I was trying to make a new friend with each person I met and just being open to that new experience of like, oh, I'm out of my element, but I'm open to it. Then I found like, oh, suddenly all these people I no longer felt, it's like I was projecting my uncomfortable state. And when I made an effort to reach out and like talk to in concrete steps, like maybe I talked to people that I might not have approached and just struggled to, maybe I tried to speak English to see if they knew English, and most of them did. But what I found is sometimes if a French person, if they don't really want to talk, like they'll sort of pretend like they don't know English. But I didn't even take that personally because I'm thinking like I'm an outsider. And so, I think a lot of it comes down to don't take things personally because they're not personal. They're just that person is acting how they act, and it has nothing to do with you. And yeah. Oh, so you were talking about all the traveling you've done. I do have a question.
Go
So
ahead.
compared to Western cuisine and food, drink, whatever, maybe namely the U.S. And maybe some Europe too. Like, what have you tried anything that was nothing like Western cuisine, or nothing
Sure.
like you'd had in the U.S.? It doesn't have to be like American food, but
Yeah.
it just blew you away. So it was like totally different from what we have in the U.S. or in the West in general. But it was just like, this is the most amazing thing ever. Why isn't this more popular in the U.S.?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you two different things. One of them is kind of a weird story, and the other one is a perfectly natural, understandable story. The first time I was in Thailand, I was still in the Navy, and we went into a port, Pattaya, or the British would say Pattaya Beach, Thailand. And I never really had Thai food before. Honestly, I was a pretty young Navy guy and hadn't had Thai food. And I went into a restaurant and I had some local Thai food. And right from the very beginning, the whole experience was just soft and chill and friendly. And the people there were all about, they were so happy that I was there, and I ordered this prawn dish in Thailand. And I didn't know what it was going to be, but you know what they did? Without even asking me, they adjusted it for an American palate. Not as a way of dumbing it down. They made it, it was terrific, but they knew that I just didn't know Thailand. So they seasoned it like right in the middle, and I had these prawns that were, they were as big as the thumb in the bottom of your hand. They were huge, beautiful, fresh
Mm.
prawns in a beautiful sauce with some super light kind of rice noodles and a fresh salad. And that whole experience, I thought, you know what, from now on, if I get a chance and I don't know what I'm going to eat, I'm going to eat Thai food, because that experience and that food and the attitude with which it was served and the care that it looked like it had been prepared with, that
Mm.
just kind of like won me over. I just
So was this sort of like
won.
a pan fried thing,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
okay, was it served with
But
like the lettuce leaves and stuff, or like what?
um,
How was it presented? Was it just like on a plate, or was it in a
it was
sauce
very,
or
yeah,
anything?
very delicately presented. If there was lettuce with it, everything had been sculpted in a
Mm.
really beautiful way. Everything had been like, how sometimes you're going to serve like half an avocado and you slice it so you fan it out and it looks like leaves and you lay it on the plate just so. Everything on the plate had been done with such care that I was just all about that meal. I'll never
Mm.
forget that meal for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I love Thai
Another
food.
another one that was fun because it was crazy. We were eating outside amidst 4 or 5 grass huts in South Sudan with some guys from the Sudanese People's Liberation Army. Tough, some
Wow.
pretty tough dudes. But we were having fresh goat because we were there as their guests, and we were putting a little bit of money into the area, and they were escorting us around that part of the country so we would be safe, because it was a little dicey, here and there. So we're at this plastic table, and they're making fresh goat, and they're making these huge pieces, these huge round pieces of sorghum bread, kind of a lavender colored sorghum bread, flatbread, fresh flatbread with
Okay.
brown spots where it had touched the side of the like the metal pan that they were using to cook it in. And somebody would come around the table, and they would they would wash your hands. Everybody got to wash their hands. We were eating with both Christians and Muslims at the same time. So, I as a natural left-hander, I had to grab my inside of my pant leg with my left arm and just try to eat with my right hand so I wouldn't be offensive to any.
Right. Okay.
But they were very forgiving. But what was so cool is we're all eating out of a common dish. There's like 9 of us at this table. We all have these big hunks of purple sorghum bread and some kind of drink. They love orange Fanta for some reason. That's like the drink to have in South Sudan. So we're having sweet tea or orange Fanta. Normally you wouldn't drink the water. And we're having this goat stew, freshly made goat stew in the middle. So everybody would tear off a piece of bread and you dip it into the common dish, and then you would eat it. And for guys that are around a table, Muslims and Christians and animists, people that had tribal scarring across their forehead, not everybody was from the same tribe, and yet we were sharing this common meal together,
Mm.
with the stars above us, and up in the trees just off to one side were these African kites. I mean, that's a bird of prey. I mean, a really gnarly looking bird of prey. And one of the colonels at the table was telling a story about a guy that he would dip his meat into the sauce, and then he would start talking, and he would gesture with this meat before he would eat it. He was like swinging it around, and these kites were watching him, not at our meal, but at a meal sometime in the past. And he's telling this story, and he's saying the guy he was eating with had been talking and swinging this big chunk of meat around, this goat meat. And as soon as he goes to put it in his mouth, one of the kites swoops down and puts his talon right through his top lip and grabs this hunk of meat and tries to fly off with it. But he's literally put his talons through the guy's upper lip. So he's being this bird with like a 5-foot wingspan is trying to drag this guy away from the table. So as soon as he said that, all of a sudden, okay, no with the meat. Just eat the meat and put your hand back down, because we had kites like one tree over from where we were eating.
Wait, what happened though? What was the resolution of the bird grabbing this guy's lip?
Oh, it finally let go, but very reluctant to let go of its catch. But he wound up with a nasty, ripped up, upper lip, and because those kites, I mean, their talons are about as long as your little finger. I mean, they're nasty. But you know what? We told stories. We had a terrific meal. We watched the moon rise, and then they gave us the best hut to sleep in. They had given us the best huts, and these little thin foam mattresses, and we had our mosquito nets and stuff. But it was just one of those dining experiences where, I never really knew what to do or what a Sudanese person was going to be like. But after having one meal, a collective meal, and seeing people who were from different tribes and different faiths and different backgrounds all eating together and then welcoming us to their table, it was like, you know what, this world, we're going to make it. We can get along. We can make it. We just share a good meal together once in a while and have that intimate experience that really knits people together. That's what food's really all about for me.
Yeah. Do you ever wonder if the internetization of everything is could hurt us in that area? How everyone seems, younger generations seem to be more and more online, as opposed to, fewer people are going out with like groups of friends, for example. A lot of it is now, sort of one-off, datings a lot of times, just like, they're using an app and then maybe there's no common friends there. Or, people are just less likely to have a group of friends. Studies have shown that there's more and more people being on their own. Do you think that kind of hurts us?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even before our current pandemic, there was already statistically, and this is well known in the social sciences, there was already a pandemic of loneliness. I mean, loneliness is everywhere, and it's really related to trying to get something. Like right now, we're doing an interview. We don't live in the same spot. We're talking about a topic we're interested in. We're having a good time, and that's a great thing. But that doesn't solve loneliness, which comes from literally being together with people that you want to get to know, that you love, you like their fellowship and their friendship, you like company. That's a huge thing. And I think that the internet is like a lot of wonderful inventions. It's a tool or a weapon. You have to choose it as a tool, and don't try to get it to do things that it can't do. And it can't put people together in a way that resolves loneliness at its core. You can connect on the internet, but at its core, loneliness is about physically being in the same space with other people and sharing a good meal. I mean, there's hardly a better way to get to know somebody than to have a meal together, because you've got that third thing to focus on, which takes the queasiness and the quirkiness and the nervousness out of it. If you're both sharing like your favorite Greek pizza, it's like. So
what do you think is a good first step? Like, let's say somebody's never had friends over for dinner, or it's been years since they've done that. What's a good, because I think it's kind of scary for a lot of people, right? There's this, you don't know if the people that you see sometimes, whether it's at work or you hang out with them from time to time as friends, you don't know how deep it goes, right? So there's always the risk. that,
Right.
you're going to invite people over and then it's going to fall apart, or, one person comes over instead of the 8 that promised to be there. So do you have any advice for someone who doesn't, because I think we've established that it's a good idea to do this, to invite friends over, or to try to organize something where you can have an actual physical community of people sharing food or their company or a drink or something. What
Here's
do you
an
think
idea.
yeah.
This just kind of popped into my head, and I really appreciate you asking that question. Here's the idea for me. In the old days, I'm 63 years old, man. I'm an old fart. So in the old days, when people got together for a meal, they would have a potluck. I mean, this goes back into all kinds of American and Native traditions, First Nation peoples, cultural traditions. You have a potluck. You bring something that you know how to make that you really like, and you bring it to a group dinner, and then you will share it. But now that means you got to make something. Let's update it for the modern age. Let's say you got a young guy or a young girl, and they really want to get together and have some communion with people. They want to share some time together. How about this? Get your favorite takeout food and get enough for you and one other person. And you invite 4 people over. Everybody brings their favorite takeout with a little bit to share. And you have a meal with something that you're guaranteed to like, and you get to try what other people also like. When you know what other people like, then you start to know other people. And when you start to know other people, you got it made. Then the ice is broken, and it's just going to be a great experience. And to me, that's a super easy way to do it in an urban setting or in a setting where you're trying to meet new people, where you've moved into a different area. But I would say, yeah, bring enough for yourself and something to share, whatever your favorite is, to get 5 or 6 people together and just have this kind of crazy smorgasbord meal. But the underlying purpose of the meal is to share something that you like, so that people get to know you and you get to know them.
Yeah.
I think it's a great way to do
That's
it.
a smart approach, because I think the cooking can be intimidating. I've tried to push people I know to cook more, and sometimes it's this matter. It's not that they don't think they can do it; it's that they're afraid of the judgment, and so with
Right.
getting takeout, and that sort of alleviates that worry. So yeah, that's a smart approach. Thanks for that.
Sure.
So jumping back to, we were talking about the concept of bon vivant. And
Yeah.
the reason why I keep coming back to that is because I think that's at the heart of like this type of person is what I feel like I am probably. But I do want to talk. I know we've talked before a little bit about this, that it almost feels like sometimes these words have a negative connotation attached to them. Like I know that there's the word epicurean and gourmand and bon vivant, and these types of words that I think people tend to. I know when I first saw, like, I have a friend, a fellow creative, who's a creative director, and his Instagram at one point he changed, just his personal Instagram. He just changed it to bon vivant, and because he was posting photos of his life, sometimes intermixed with his artwork, and it was sort of just that sort of expressive platform. And at first, when I was like, oh, what? This was many years ago, and I looked at the term, and I had heard it before. And it seemed like the idea was that I was getting from Googling it is that it was this like super indulgent person, like almost like that cartoonish like depiction of like the greedy capitalist that's like sitting at a table just like eating a roast pig or something, just shoveling it into their mouth. And I think that it almost that those types of ideas sometimes have that negative label attached to them. Is that just
Yeah.
me, or do you feel like there is sort of this?
Whenever you use a phrase that's not often used, or especially a phrase that's outside of your language or your culture, you risk immediately having there being multiple understandings, or at least a misunderstanding. So what I would say is, anytime you want to use a term, and this comes back again from my military background, anytime we were going to hold a big exercise or we were going to do a big operation, we had a series of terms that we had to define, called an operational definition, meaning we wanted to make sure that everybody we were involved with, because sometimes it was a life or death matter, everybody knew exactly what that term meant. So I would say, feel free to take bon vivant, and within the several different ideas of what it is, put a catchphrase underneath it which is in English, which is essentially experiencing the best of life joyfully. Something like that. If you want
I'm gonna
that
write
to
that
be
down.
what bon vivant means, then say that, this is the home of the new bon vivant, and it's going to say experiencing the best of life joyfully. And if that's what you want it to mean, then say you've created an environment where you can live with that, and you don't have to worry about somebody else shooting you down. And you can say, "Hey, that's how I'm defining it," And the thing is it's
Yeah.
close enough to what it was supposed to mean before it was adulterated or before it was ruined by, because again, things exist in the middle. You can screw up going excess in either direction.
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite authors, C.S. Lewis, talks about evil is presented into the world in pairs, hoping that if you can't be drawn to one side of evil, your revulsion and repulse of the one evil will throw you into the next. So it's really the ridge line in the middle that we walk in life, and we want to be on that ridge line, and that's where the best air is, that's where the best food is, and that's where you can see where you're going. So to me, all of that's inside this idea of the good life that you're talking
Yeah, that
about
makes
with
sense. I knew a guy who used to actually say, like, let's say I said, "Hey, you want to go play this video game, or you want to go do this thing, whatever." Like, it could be anything. Watch a movie, whatever. If he felt that he enjoyed it too much in general, he would no longer do it. So he'd say, "Oh no, I enjoy that too much, so it feels like dangerous to me," because he thought that somehow, I don't know, somehow by indulging in the things he liked to do, like, his hobbies, basically, like, if he were to choose hobbies, I would guess that they'd be those things that he really enjoys doing. But for some reason, he was pushing himself away from that simply because I never got a good explanation from him. And it's a funny thing that I think happens is someone might be from a certain upbringing where maybe some people might be sheltered to a certain extent, where then they find something new and they're actually scared of it because they don't understand why they like it so much. I knew this lady who was part of basically a cult where they made everyone destroy their DVDs and any sort of media, physical media, and that sort of stuff. Typical cult stuff, just like leave everything behind. And because of that, in my interactions with her, I would find that sometimes she seems to be hesitant to, like, be honest about her interests. Like, she didn't want to say, "Oh, I really like DC movies or Marvel movies," or she'd be really withholding about it because any of that media, like, she had been trained at some point in her life that it was like there was a bad element to it, so she was not admitting to herself that this was something she really loved. I just,
Right.
it's kind of nuts, but
It is. I think life. I mean, as you experience life and as you become more mature, you want to be able to handle more interesting and extreme experiences. Some of them can be dangerous, and some of them can draw you into an area where you discover a weak part of yourself. The thing to do, I think, is to sample it small and strengthen yourself. I mean, take that as a note that this is an area I need to know more about, an area I need to understand better, but it's an area that if I embrace it, I want to embrace it with a certain level of self-control, because there's power here. I think of something
right.
like absinthe, like the favorite drink of some of the writers in France when Hemingway and all the people were writing in France, and absinthe was really popular. This drink that's kind of it's a really almost it's a concoction that does different things to different people, but it's extremely powerful. So to have a sample of it or have a little sip and get a kind of an absinthe buzz would be one thing, but to have that be your drink, then
Your
that can
go-to.
become, yeah, like anything. It can become your demon. It can become your undoing.
Oh yeah,
These
I
things are
guess.
powerful. So we have to, and I'm going to kind of close with this, and that's going to be this. Throughout my life with Teresa, now 35 plus years, one of the expressions that I've raised my kids, we've got 4 kids, is this expression, moderation in all things except unconditional love. So feel free to get out there and sample what life has to offer. Listen to your heart. I mean, because there are dangerous things out there. There are evil things out there, but there's so much goodness. So much goodness. And you want to be drawn into the richness and the abundance of life. So moderation in all things except unconditional love. I think that's not a bad way to go through.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's good. I like that a lot. Well, thanks so much for your time. I know we've gone a little bit over here, but yeah.
No, it was a real treat. Pleasure. I had a ton of fun. Well, wonderful discussion, and I wish you the very, very best with the podcast or wherever this goes. And I'll just say hello to all the people out there that are looking to live life rich and large and in abundance and joyfully and together. I mean, it's with other people that the real richness and intimacy of life is experienced. So thanks for inviting me into your intimate circle, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Have a great night. We'll talk again soon.
You bet. Take care, and we'll see you.
Thanks.